The wind screamed like a hungry beast through the frozen wasteland. Snow blew across the rocks in thick white waves. The ground was nothing but hard ice, broken trees, and jagged stone. The sky above was gray, heavy with more snow. It felt like the whole world had gone cold and silent, except for one small sound, a soft whimper, wrapped in old cloth. Barely holding together, the alien girl huddled behind a fallen metal pod. Her skin was pale purple, her long silver hair frozen to her back. Her hands were blue from the cold. She held something tightly in her arms, small fur-covered creature with wide, frightened eyes. It was her only friend, her pet. Its body shook with each breath. She pulled it close, whispering in her native tongue, "Just a little longer. Please, stay with me." Her name was Vera, and she was only 13 star cycles old. Her home had once been warm, full of light and food and song. But the sky fire came. Ships from above. Strange ones, cold ones. They destroyed her village, took her people. The ground cracked and snow began to fall for the first time in centuries. She had been running ever since. Food was gone. The little water she had was now frozen in a broken container. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her pet Nako was growing weaker. Tonight would be the end. The sun had already set. Darkness crept over the land. Vera looked up at the sky one last time, and then she saw it. A light, faint, flickering, moving through the blizzard. She froze. At first, she thought it was one of the enemy scouts' cold ones returning. But it didn't move like them. No machine sounds. No drones. Just a tall, slow figure walking through snow, holding something glowing in front of him. A fire. She blinked. Was she dreaming? Vera quickly ducked down, pulling Nako close. Her heart beat fast. Fire was forbidden now. Fire brought enemies. Fire drew attention, but her body cried for warmth. Her mind begged her to move, but fear chained her to the ground. The figure kept walking. Then it paused. It turned in her direction. She held her breath, not daring to move. The figure slowly lowered. The glowing object, a cube with red-orange heat tanned, set it on the ground near the pod she was hiding behind. He didn't speak, didn't look directly at her. Then he turned and walked away into the storm. Gone silence again. Vera stared at the glowing cube. She didn't understand what it was, but it shimmered like a campfire. The snow near it had melted, steam hissed in the air. Warmth reached her face even from a few feet away. Was it a trap? She looked down at Nako. His breathing was slowing. His eyes barely open. She made her choice. With shaking legs, she crawled out from behind the pod. The cold bit her skin instantly. But she reached for the cube slowly, carefully, and stopped just an inch away. It was real heat touched her fingers, like a soft blanket. She pulled it closer. She set Nako down beside it. The creature curled around it with a faint, happy chirp. Dora cried. Not because she was sad, but because she felt her fingers again. Because she felt her cheeks again. Because she was not alone. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She kept watch, her back against the pod. Her pet curled around the heat cube. The fire glowed through the night, soft and gentle, like a hand on her shoulder. She kept thinking about the figure. It was no alien like her. Its shape was different. Its walk was strange. It had a strange body, tall, with thick covering, heavy steps. But it hadn't attacked. It hadn't said a word. It had just left warmth. Why? Vera didn't know. But in the middle of a frozen death world where everything had tried to kill her or break her, someone had given her warmth and walked away. That meant something. Maybe she wasn't the last kind soul left on this planet. Maybe someone still cared, even if it was a human, and as the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. The little alien girl looked in the direction where the figure had vanished and hoped he would come back, because now, for the first time in weeks, she had hope. And it burned like fire in her chest. Asterisk, the heat cube was gone when she woke up. Vera blinked and sat up quickly, heart racing. Snow had covered the spot where the glowing cube had burned through the ice last night. Her pet Nako still slept beside her, breathing a little stronger now. But the warmth was fading fast. The cold air returned like claws, scratching at her skin. She looked around, hoping it was still nearby. Nothing. The stranger, whoever he was, had taken it with him. Her first real warmth in days. Gone. She held Nako close again and tucked him inside her torn coat. But something was different now. She wasn't thinking only about surviving anymore. She kept wondering about him. It's that tall figure in the snow. That silent firebringer. Was he real? Was he kind? Would he come back? Suddenly, a strange smell caught her nose. Stock smoke, but not fire smoke from destruction. This was food smoke. Her stomach growled instantly. Her head spun with hunger. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Nako hadn't eaten in longer. Slowly, she crawled up over the hill of frozen rock, pulling herself with one hand while keeping Nako pressed to her chest. That smell got stronger, and then she saw him again. The same figure from last night, sitting near a small, controlled fire. It was inside a circle of rocks, smoke rising straight into the cold sky. The man sat under a piece of metal, shaped like a tent, half snow-covered. He wasn't wearing full armor, just strong clothes, thick boots, and a scarf wrapped around his face. A human. He didn't look like a soldier, more like a traveler, a survivor. His hands moved fast. He was cooking something over the fire meat, turning on a metal stick, her mouth filled with water. Her body ached for food, but she didn't move. Instead, her pet made the decision for her. With a sudden chirp, Nako poked his head out from her coat and let out a tiny tick squeak. The man turned instantly. Vera froze. They stared at each other across the snow. The man didn't reach for a weapon, didn't stand. He simply looked at her for a moment, then turned his eyes back to the fire, and without a word, he placed a small piece of the meat on a flat rock and gently slid it across the snow toward her dough. Vera didn't trust it at first. Maybe it was poisoned. Maybe it was a trick. But Nako jumped down and sniffed it, then took a bite, then another. The meat was real hot. Juicy. Vera's stomach screamed now. She didn't want to beg, but she stepped forward slowly, step by step, until she reached the food. She picked it up, sniffed it, then looked at the man again. He just kept cooking. He wasn't watching her anymore. She took a bite. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. Her hands shook as she ate, careful not to drop even a crumb. Her fingers burned with the heat, but she didn't stop. Warmth spread from her mouth to her chest. The man finally spoke. Just one word. Cold. She didn't understand. She only looked at him. He pointed to her coat, then rubbed his arms and made a shivering motion. Then he tossed her a soft roll of cloth. A blanket. Thick and warm. She caught it, held it in her arms, and for the first time truly stared at him. He had blue eyes, tired eyes, like someone who had seen too much. She didn't say thank you. She didn't know how in his language. But she gave a small nod and wrapped the blanket around herself and Nako. He nodded back. Later that day, began building something nearby. He didn't push her away, didn't ask for help, but he built a second small tent lower than his, next to the fire pit. He used metal sheets and long sticks. When it was done, he pointed at it, then at her. It was hers. He had made her a home. Vera didn't move right away. She stood outside it, staring. No one had given her shelter since the day her village burned. She walked in slowly, the blanket still wrapped around her, and placed Nako on the soft corner inside. It was warm, dry, safe, outside. The human returned to his own tent and said nothing. But before he went inside, he threw another small fire cube into her corner and nodded once more. Vera sat in her tiny shelter, holding her pet close, her eyes wide and full of wonder. He came back, he brought fire again. He brought food, and now he gave her a home. The next morning came with silence, no storm, no wind, just still white snow stretching out like a frozen sea. Vera woke inside her small shelter, the blanket pulled around her shoulders, her pet Nako breathing softly beside her. Warm, that strange, beautiful warmth still glowed from the fire cube left by the human. It flickered like a small sun in the corner of her little tent made from scrap metal and cloth. She reached out, let her fingers hover above the cube, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, she smiled. Outside, she heard movement. Careful, not loud. The sound of metal being placed, wood being chopped. She peeked through the flap and saw him. The human? He was working again. He always seemed to be building something. Fixing, placing, hammering without a word. A quiet force, like the earth itself. Vera watched as he cut thin tree branches, then tied them with wire. He stood beside the old wreck of a ship, half buried in snow, was turning pieces of it into something useful. A wind wall, maybe, or more shelter. She didn't know his name. She didn't understand his language, but his actions spoke louder than words. After some time, he noticed her watching. He lifted one hand not to wave, not to scare, but to invite. He pointed at the pile of small rocks, then pointed at the fire pit between them. She understood. He wanted help. Her legs trembled as she stood up. Not from fear this time, but because it had been so long since someone had asked for her help. So long since she felt needed. She picked up Nako, tucked him inside the blanket, stepped out into the snow. The air was cold again, but not as cruel as before. When she reached him, the man gave a small nod, then handed her a rock. Heavy, but smooth. Together, they built a stone wall around the fire pit. It would trap heat better, he showed her by pointing. She followed his lead. Stack here, leave space here. He made shapes with his hands. 'Twas a language of work, of movement, and she understood it well. Time passed quickly. Her hands grew sore. But she didn't stop. Even Nako helped, tugging little sticks and pushing them with his snout. Once finished, the man stepped back and looked at their work. Then, Kay smiled. It was the first time she saw his full face. He wasn't young, old either. Rough beard, scar near his jaw. Eyes like deep water, tired but kind. He pulled off his gloves and reached into a small bag. He handed her something, a small flat stone with a picture carved into it. She stared at it. The shape was simple. A fire between two figures. Her and him. She looked up at him, confused but curious. He placed his hand on his chest. Eli, he said slowly. She blinked. He tapped his chest again. Eli. His name. Vera hesitated, then pointed to herself. Quietly, she whispered, Vera. He repeated it softly. Vera. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other in the cold light. A human and an alien girl sharing names beside a fire. Later that day, he brought out something strange. A small broken machine flat, metal, blinking with a dim red light. He set it on the snow and began fixing it. Tools in hand, focused, Vera sat nearby, watching closely. She didn't know what it was, but she liked watching him work. Every motion had purpose. Every wire, every twist, every click meant something. Nako curled up in her lap, warm and calm. As the sun lowered, Eli lit the fire again. This time, he used pieces of the new wall. It worked better now. The flame burned stronger, hotter. They all sat around Vera, Eli, and Nako. Eli handed her a cup, warm liquid inside, not just water. Something sweeter. She sipped carefully. Her eyes widened. It tasted like honey. She whispered a word from her own language, Solaro. It meant gift too big for thanks. Eli didn't understand, but he smiled again. She pointed to the cup. Solaru, she said again. He nodded, not knowing the meaning, but knowing it was something good. That night, Vera went to sleep not as a stranger hiding in the dark, but as someone invited into the light. Her shelter was hers. The warmth was shared, and the human Neela had not only given her fire, he had given her a reason to belong. Asterisk, the stars were sharp in the sky that night. No clouds, no storm. Just deep black space above and silence all around. Vera lay on her side inside the little shelter Eli built for her. The blanket wrapped around her body, the heat cube glowing softly near her feet. Her pet Nako was curled up beside her, breathing softly, but something didn't feel right. She opened her eyes. At first, it was quiet. Then it came again. A low cry. Soft, broken. It was Nako. She sat up quickly. His body was twitching. His eyes fluttered. He gave a weak, pained sound and tried to stand, but one of his small legs dragged behind uselessly. His paw was bleeding. Badly. Vera gasped. She didn't know what happened. He had been fine. Maybe he stepped on sharp ice. Maybe frost had damaged his skin, but now his paw was turning blue. Blood was dripping onto the cloth beneath him. Her heart raced. No, no, please, she whispered, lifting him into her arms. His body was cold again, shivering. In pain, she didn't have medicine. She didn't have knowledge. All she had was fear. She pushed open the flap and ran outside into the snow, bare feet touching ice, not caring. Her breath came out in white clouds. Her eyes searched for Eli's shelter. The fire near his tent was still burning. She ran toward it. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She fell to her knees beside his fire and held Nako out with trembling hands. Please. She cried in her language. Help. Eli came out fast, half-dressed, pulling on a thick coat. His eyes fell on Nako, then on her face. Then back to Nako again. He dropped to his knees beside her and reached into a red box she had never seen. Before, it had a strange symbol on a TAY cross. He opened it quickly. Inside were rolls of bandage, small tools, bottles with strange liquids. He took Nako gently but firmly from her arms. She tensed, ready to fight if he hurt her pet. But he worked with care. He cleaned the blood. He washed the wound with warm liquid that smelled sharp. Nako cried out once, and Vera nearly pulled him away. If Eli looked at her and shook his head, "Trust," he said. She froze. He wrapped the paw in soft white cloth, pressing it tight. He placed Nako on a small heating pad, then covered him with a second blanket. Vera sat beside him, wide-eyed. Her hands trembled from cold and fear, but she couldn't look away. Eli's fingers moved fast, confident. This wasn't the first time he had done this. When it was over, he looked at her. "He'll live," he said softly. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the feeling in them. Hope. She reached out and touched Eli's hand. Just for a moment. Just enough. He nodded. That night, she stayed near his fire. Not in her tent. Not away. Beside him, together, Nako lay between them, snoring lightly. His small body wrapped in cloth, paw lifted on a stone to stop the swelling. Eli handed Vera a small piece of dry meat. She ate it slowly, thoughtfully. Then he showed her something else. From his coat, he pulled a small picture. It was old, worn water, damaged. She leaned closer. It showed a woman and a child. Human, both smiling. Vera looked up at Eli. He pointed to the woman, wife, then the child, daughter, then to himself. Gone. She understood. They were lost. Dead, maybe. Like her people. Like her home. She looked at him, and in a small voice, she said, Solaru. A gift too big for thanks. He smiled again. A sad smile, but not broken. The fire crackled between them. Not just warmth now, but something stronger. Connection by morning. Nako was breathing better. He even wagged his tail a little. Vera fed him tiny bits of dried fruit Eli had given her. Eli fixed the shelter roof. That day, Vera helped. She learned how to tie strong knots using wire. She learned how to check traps for small animals in the snow. She listened, watched, learned. They didn't speak the same words, but they understood each other now, and every time Vera looked at Eli, she no longer saw a stranger. She saw someone who saved her family, and in this frozen world, that meant more than anything. The fire crackled warmly in the snow, casting orange light on the silver metal walls. Vera sat inside her shelter, carefully feeding Nako tiny pieces of dried meat. His paw was healing, slowly, but better each day. He even tried to stand today, giving a proud squeak before falling back into her arms. She smiled, rubbing his furry head. Outside, Eli worked as always. He was building something new now. Roof made of old glass and melted plastic sheets. Vera didn't know why, but he looked focused. Each day, he made the small camp stronger. A place where wind couldn't get in, where heat stayed longer, where the snow didn't cover their beds anymore. They were survivors. No more than that. They were a team now. That night, after dinner, Eli sat across the fire and drew shapes in the snow. Vera leaned closer, curious. He pointed at the mountain in the distance, then drew an arrow from their camp to a mark far beyond it. Then he looked at her and said softly, Outpost, human. Her heart jumped. There were more of him. He nodded. Maybe, if signal works. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough. They weren't just trying to survive. He was trying to go home, and maybe, just maybe, he would take her with him. She touched her fingers to her chest and said, Vera, then pointed to him. Eli, then to the mountain. Together, Eli smiled and nodded. Double quotes, yes, together. But fate had other plans. Later that night, Vera woke up. Suddenly, something felt wrong. The fire outside was low, almost gone. But that wasn't it. She heard something movement. Not Eli, something else. She crawled to the flap of her shelter and peered out into the cold. The snow was glowing faintly from the dying embers. Eli was asleep, curled inside his own shelter. But in the distance, shadows tall, thin, wrong dot at least 3 figures moving through the trees. Slow, careful, watching her. Blood turned to ice. Raiders, not from her village, not from any world she knew. She had seen them once before, long black coats, strange insect masks, sharp weapons shaped like claws. They hunted survivors, took tools, took food, sometimes took people. She ducked back inside, heart racing. She wanted to scream, run, but she knew they'd hear. Instead, she grabbed Nako and crawled silently to Eli's shelter. She shook his shoulder. He woke fast, his hand already reaching for the weapon by his side. Vera pointed. Bad there. Shadows. He looked through a gap in the wall and froze. His body tensed. His eyes turned sharp. Without a word, he kicked Snow onto the fire, killing the light. Then he motioned to her hide. They crawled silently into the small storage. Pit he had dug behind their tents, used for keeping food cool. Now it became there. Only hope, the pit was barely big enough for both of them. Nako curled tightly in Vera's arms. She pressed her hand to his mouth to keep him from making noise. Eli peeked through a crack in the snow-covered top. The raiders were closer now, too close. One passed just meters from them, scanning with a glowing red device. Another walked straight to Vera's shelter, tearing through it like paper. She bit her lip to keep from crying. Eli held his breath beside her. His hand slowly gripped the knife at his belt. If they were found, he would fight. But fighting wouldn't save them. Not against three armed raiders. One of the shadows stopped, turned, looked straight toward their pit. Then, a long silence, and the sound of footsteps. Moving away, then more, until the night returned to quiet. Vera didn't move until Eli did. He waited many minutes, then slowly lifted the cover and looked around. Gone. They were gone. But their camp was destroyed. The fire pit kicked over, her shelter broken. One of the food boxes missing. The snow was full of boot prints. Vera sat on her knees, staring at the mess. Her hands shook. She looked at Eli. "Why?" she asked softly. He didn't answer, but his eyes were full of fire, now not warmth, but anger. He picked up the broken parts, began clearing the area. Fast, focused. They would leave. It was no longer safe. By morning, Vera helped him pack what was left. The fire cubes, tools, food. He placed it all on a metal sled he had been building. She hadn't understood what it was for until now. It had wheels for snow, a moving shelter as the sun rose behind the mountains. The two of them stood together, looking back at what was once their safe place. Burned, smashed, gone. Vera squeezed Nako gently. Eli looked at her and nodded. "We go?" And they walked away, human, alien girl, and small pet, leaving fire behind, but carrying hope with them. The snow crunched under the sled's wheels as they moved. Slowly through the icy woods, Vera sat on the back of the makeshift vehicle, her arms wrapped tightly around Nako. The wind stung her cheeks, but it didn't hurt as much as before. She was wrapped in a thick coat Eli had given her, ticked together from fabric, leather, and old plastic. It was heavy, but warm. The fire cube sat in the center of the sled, locked into a metal base that Eli had built himself. It didn't just warm them now. It moved with them. The sled was no ordinary cart. Eli had taken broken parts from the crashed ships and made something new. Its wheels gripped snow. Its body could hold supplies. And most important, it had heat. A pipe ran under the bench where Vera sat, blowing gentle warmth against her back. This was not a hiding place anymore. It was a journey. They were headed toward the mountains, toward the place Eli had pointed at. A human outpost. He didn't know if it still worked, but it was their best chance. Behind them, the raiders might still be hunting, but in front of them, maybe safety, maybe home. Vera watched the trees pass by, tall and frozen. They reminded her of her old village before everything burned. She leaned her cheek against the coat and whispered softly to Nako. "We keep moving," she said, "like fire. We don't stop." The little creature gave a tired chirp and nuzzled into her arm. She smiled, then looked forward. Eli was walking ahead of the sled, pulling it with a strong rope wrapped around his waist. His boots left deep marks in the snow. He never complained, never stopped unless it was needed. That was what she admired most about him. Not just his strength, but his purpose. Every step he took had meaning. They stopped at midday, near a wide frozen river. Eli checked the ice. He tapped it with a tool, then crouched to listen. Crack, not safe. He turned to Vera and made an X shape with his arms. She understood. They had to go around. It would take longer. But it was better than sinking. As they changed direction, she asked quietly, "Eli, do you think there are more like you?" He turned his head slightly. She didn't know if he understood, but he gave a slow nod, then pointed at the mountain again. "Outpost," he said. Then pointed to her chest. "You, safe." Her chest tightened. A little, not from cold. From feeling no one had ever said that to her before. You safe. Simple words, but they felt like everything. As night fell, they made camp near a rock wall, using it as wind cover. Eli built a tiny shelter using foldable pieces from the sled. Vera helped set it up. She could do more now. She was learning fast, how to tie, how to brace, how to check for cracks. She was no longer a scared child hiding in the snow. She was part of something now. That night, while Nako slept inside the tent, Vera sat by the glowing cube and watched Eli repair one of his devices. It blinked red and green, making a soft ticking noise. She tilted her head. "What is it?" Eli looked up and smiled faintly. "Beacon." He showed her a drawing on the snow, 2 dots, connected by a signal line. One dot was them. The other was the outpost. "If we get closer, they might hear." He said. She leaned in, wide-eyed. "Someone will come," he nodded. If they're still alive, it wasn't a promise. But it was hope, and hope was enough. The wind blew strong that night. The trees groaned. Snow fell harder. Vera lay inside the tent, Nako tucked beside her, listening to Eli's quiet breathing outside as he kept watch. He never slept much. He always stayed awake longer, like a guard. She wanted to tell him how thankful she was. She wanted to say that she wasn't afraid anymore, not when he was near. But the words weren't there in his language, so she whispered in her own Solaro. A gift too big for thanks. By morning, the sky had changed. Not dark, but gold. The mountain ahead glowed in the sunlight. And for the first time, they could see something strange. A shape on the mountain, not rock, not snow. Metal, not a building. Vera stood beside Eli and pointed. "Is that it?" Eli didn't speak. He just stared. Then slowly, he smiled. And for the first time in weeks, she heard him laugh. Low, rough, but real. "Yes," he said. "That's it. The outpost." They were close. The sun rose slowly behind the mountains, casting golden light across the frozen valley. Vera stood at the edge of a snowy cliff, her eyes wide. Breath caught in her throat. Down below, half buried in ice and stone, stood a long, broken building. Its walls were metal, rusted by time and cold. One side had caved in, but a tall tower still pointed toward the sky. It wasn't a home, it was a hope. Eli stepped beside her, wiping sweat from his forehead. It pulled the sled up the last steep hill with every bit of strength in him. His coat was torn. His gloves were thin. But when he looked at the tower, he smiled. He pointed at it and said, "Outpost." Vera nodded, heart pounding. They had finally made it. The two of them, along with little Nako still bandaged but walking again, made their way down the slope. The ice cracked beneath their feet, but held. The air here felt different. Not warmer, but less wild, like the place remembered what it used to be. They reached the door. It was frozen shut. Eli pulled a tool from the sled, jammed it into the crack, and pushed with all his weight. Metal groaned, then popped open. Dust and cold air burst out. Inside, it was dark, silent, dead. Dead Vera stayed close to his side, holding Nako under her coat. She stepped carefully through the hallway as Eli lit a small flashlight. The beam showed shattered glass, old human signs, and piles of snow that had blown in through holes in the roof. Eli moved with purpose. He found a panel in the wall and opened it. Sparks flew dead. He grunted, then moved to the back to what looked like a control Room machines lined the walls. Most were broken. But in the center of the room stood a thick gray terminal. One green light blinked faint, but alive, Eli reached into his bag and pulled out the beacon. Device he had carried this whole time. He plugged it into the terminal. The light turned blue. A low humming sound filled the room. Vera held her breath. Eli pressed a button, nothing. He pressed it again, still nothing. Then, beep, a soft pulse. A blinking light on the machine's screen. Signal sent, Eli whispered. Vera blinked. Signal. He nodded. If they're out there, they'll hear us now. Hours passed. They fixed what they could inside the outpost. Eli repaired a heater unit in the corner, and slowly, the room began to warm. Vera wrapped Nako in a towel and fed him from a small food tin. She looked out the window often. The sky had begun to change. Clouds gathered, but not storm clouds. Something different. The wind didn't howl like before. It was quiet, too. Quiet then, dashed deep in the distance a sound. Not thunder, not wind, but a hum. Vera ran to the broken window, heart racing. There, far above the horizon, a light was moving. A ship. Small, fast, growing larger. She turned to Eli, eyes wide. Eli, he was already outside. He had lit a red flare held high in his hand. Smoke rising up into the cold air. The ship came closer. Vera stepped outside beside him, her hand gripping his tightly. She didn't care if her feet were cold or if the snow touched her skin. The ship slowed, hovered above. A spotlight shone down on them, and a voice through a speaker crackled in English. Survivor detected. Human ID confirmed. Preparing for pickup. Vera didn't understand the words, but she understood what they meant. They were saved. The ramp dropped. Two humans in white gear stepped down. Their helmets were strange, faces hidden, but they moved with calm hands. One looked at Eli, thought, "You were dead," he said with a rough laugh. Eli only nodded. Almost. Then he looked at Vera, who clutched Nako close. She stood still, unsure. The second human spoke. Alien life form. Friend or threat? Eli stepped in front of her. She's family. Silence. Then a nod. Then she comes with us. Inside. The ship. Vera sat beside Eli, wrapped in a thick blanket. Nako curled up on her lap again, safe and warm, as they lifted off. She looked out the window. The frozen world below was fading. The trees, the snow, the pain, all shrinking behind them. She leaned her head on Eli's arm. She whispered softly, "Solaru?" Eli looked down. "What's that mean again?" She smiled. "It means gift too big for thanks." He didn't say anything, but he understood. They had lost everything. But they had found each other, and in a world full of cold, fire had brought them warmth. But hope had brought them home.